welcoming you all with Assalamu Alaikum, and then I am really honored to introduce my guest speaker today, who is an author writing short stories and then decides to write a novel, and her debut novel wins her a whole host of awards. It was declared the best novel of the year 2022. Now, that doesn't mean that the short story genre was not recognized. It is through the recognition of that genre that led to her writing of the novel. It is a privilege to be in conversation with Louise Kennedy, and I am going to be talking about the debut novel that has created a sensation all over the world. We are very, very fortunate that the book is available at the bookstall, and I have agreed, and I'm going to play a game. Some of the audience, as I'll let you know, Louise, I am touched by the fact that some of my students have made their way to be here, old, young, current, and friends who have made their way here to listen to you. And knowing me, they know I like to create a little fascination. And my fascination is with the ending of the novel. So I have requested Louise Kennedy not to let the ending be known, because that is something that floored me. I mean, here I'm already, with all my gray hair, with my all sort of presumptuousness that I'm reading a novel, I know, fiction is supposed to be what I'm enjoying, and she pulls the carpet right under my feet. So, having said that, I'm sure you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to Louise. So Louise, you trespassed into my life. Let's talk about the novel. Can you give us a very short, very brief introduction?
So Trespasses is set in the north of Ireland, a small town on the shores of Belfast Lough in 1975, and it's about a young Catholic teacher called Cushla Lavery who teaches a class of 7 or 8-year-old children, and she also helps out in the bar that her brother runs, the family business. And so one evening in the bar, a man walks in. It's probably a bit of a cliche. A man, it's like imagine a saloon in the Wild West. A man walks into a bar, and they begin a relationship, which is a very bad idea for lots of reasons. And running alongside that story, Cushla becomes very close to the family of one of her pupils when his father is randomly, kind of savagely attacked. It's a sectarian attack.
Okay, that should link with a lot of us. It's troubles. Those of you familiar with Irish literature, with Irish writing, know that the word troubles has a particular meaning. Unfortunately, the word troubles is not something that is limited to just Ireland. We living in Pakistan are also have our fair share of troubles, living under a society that is constantly living under surveillance, constantly having to see armed personnel, security checks, all for our own thing. Now, one is the troubled background. The other is Cushla is a teacher, 20-year-old, naive, like many of the young teachers here, hoping to bring about a change, hoping to merge the difference. She's Catholic. And she hopes that the divide that has been created because of politics, and we are all aware of politics. Let me make it very clear, and I do apologize if I do offend somebody, that when I talk about the responsibility of a writer, I take a very Yeatsian, if you want to borrow from the world of Western literature, and a Habib Jalib approach from the local, and that is the role of the creative artist. What Louise has done is, she has shown us a keen eye for human experience. Here is Kushla. When you talk about Kushla, you present her as a naive person. She's grieving for her father. She has a beautiful relationship with her mother, which is like, a constant. It is a very typical Pakistani family, if I may so. The brother is quite with due apologies to the men around here, is quite a control freak. He likes to control things. We're all familiar with that. But Kushla is constantly negotiating. And her resistance that comes is in her role as a teacher. You talk about her response to a daily drill, which is the news. So could you tell us something about the news?
Yes, as I said, Kushla teaches a class of 7 or 8-year-old children. It's 1975, and I turned 8 in 1975, and I think the school day that Kushla and her pupils have really pretty much follows the lines of my school day, which was that we began the day with a prayer. It was a small Catholic school, so that was a Hail Mary. And then we did this thing that was called the news. And I think the children do that. It's maybe a kind of a form of show and tell or something. And it became quite a competitive thing, and some children were particularly good at it. It was that we would watch the television news or listen to the radio, or sometimes when we were older, get hold of a newspaper. And the following day, we would begin the school day by, I suppose, recounting those stories in our own words. And because of the time and place that we lived in, we were probably like little war reporters, and our vocabulary was probably not the vocabulary that you'd want children of that age to have, where we knew what explosives were used in particular situations. So, the use of words like gelignite, incendiary device, petrol bomb, all of that. And we also, I suppose, just because there was such a heavy security presence, that we knew the names of all of the sort of the military hardware that we saw, that we knew that the personnel carriers were called Saracens and various things. So yeah, there was all of that.
Yes, so the news is like the vocabulary of the children has changed. It is not the vocabulary of an 8-year-old that it ought to be. It is like in our own space, Main Nanna Mujahid Hu, the APS reactionary song, which no child goes to school to learn how to fight a terrorist. We, as a result of the troubled world that is created, I can see a parallel in our world also, where we are teaching our children something that is not required. And the saddest part is a child, that news, which, as you pointed out, is very clearly pointed. I'll be asking you at a certain point to read, if I may. Mm-hmm. And the child, when they talk about all these violent images, when a real good news, and that is this young child, Davies, saying, my father's found a job, or my father's got a job. That news is not welcomed at all. That just sort of disappears. News, even our responses to what we need to appreciate, have been effective by our surroundings. We started seeing the world, and that is what you show very clearly. I'm not going to use a cliched word like beautifully. I'm going to say very clearly to the audience, while reading this, I was like, is she talking about a foreign place, or is she talking about my own country? Is she talking about, today I don't know how many of you were able to attend the session, Adila Suleiman's, on art and state violence, and she was talking about the violence in Karachi, and you were there, and I just felt that this was, once again, if this was to be put in, and yet there are no graphic, violent scenes in the book. So how do you manage to create that violence? Mm-hmm. It's like literally, as is said by one of your characters, and the incidents there, that you have a school party. This is all the young children having their party, and the soldiers are there. And at that point, you create humor. Can you tell us?
Is this the disco? Is this
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that happened. And actually, I should probably explain the demographic of the town that I lived in was probably a little unusual. I think especially after 1969, people very much tried to retreat into their own communities because maybe there was a feeling of safety. But we lived in a town, we were Catholic, which was 90% Protestant, and we were Catholic. And I suppose middle class, we had a business, but our business was selling alcohol to people, I guess. But sorry. What did you ask me?
Yeah, the thing is that at
About
that
the disco. So some people have said to me that didn't happen. You know, the police didn't go into Catholic schools to do this thing. So at some point in the 1970s, someone high up in the Royal Ulster Constabulary thought that it would be a good kind of mode of community outreach to visit schools with a big glitter ball and a set of traffic lights and a turntable and have discos for the children. Yeah, that did happen a few times in my school, and you know, the police were in uniform, so that was bizarre. They were on a stage in the hall where we played games, you know, in the gym, and yeah, and playing music and with their arms folded and looking at us very dourly with their flak jackets flung on a big beanbag beside them.
So it's a very interesting sort of a scenario that it's a children's school children playing under literally the shadow of the gun. And then there's another incident where you talk about, you know, the soldiers pointing their guns towards the children going home from school. That also speaks about the violence that is as an undercurrent, and it is accepted. I mean, how many times have we really sort of, you know, we've turned around and said, well, this is for our own security. But isn't it high time? What have we given up for our security, our freedom of movement? And as a result of that, in the novel, you find that Louise Kushla is going with her friend Jerry to a party. And then, remember, they are stopped by soldiers. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably something I saw quite frequently. At one point, I think the number of security personnel, there were 30,000 troops on the streets alone in a place with a population of way less than 1 million, which was a lot, and that was separate from the police, the local police, and another regiment that was called the Ulster Defence Regiment, which is, I mean, it sort of ended up actually behaving almost like a militia, but yeah, so roadblocks and checkpoints were very frequent, and yeah, that scene is where Kushla and her friend are going to a party, and they're stopped at a checkpoint, and I mean, there's no reason for her friend who's driving to be taken out of the car and questioned, but he is. But there was, you know, there was a kind of simmering harassment that happened quite often in particular areas. So he is taken out of the car and ordered to stand against a wall, and you know, it's just this sort of few minutes of humiliation and tension, I suppose, and then he's allowed to go. But that's, I mean, I guess that's from memory. I saw my father had to leave the car several times when we were driving around.
So once again, a fun evening going out. Young people, car being randomly stopped, turning into a nightmare. And if you could, it's just at this point, a few feet away Jerry was.
Okay.
And the impact it has, and the interesting thing is, what Louise Kennedy has done is, she hasn't focused on the woman, she's focused the impact on the man. The impact of that security apparatus on the man, and leaving us with the imagination of what it would do to a woman.
How far was I to read?
Yeah, you could just read this here and then this here.
Down to the end. So this line.
Whatever you feel like.
Okay. A few feet away, Jerry was facing a brick wall, his hands behind his ears, the scene lit by a street lamp and the wink of his hazard lights. To his right and left, premises on the road were closed and caged by metal, apart from a chip shop a few doors up, the Ritz in large red letters on its cracked sign. A length of loose guttering was drooling thick, rusty liquid onto his forehead. He lifted a hand to wipe it away, and the soldier tapped his elbow with the butt of his gun. So do you want to throw it? Do you think?
You can start it.
Yeah. So this is after they've been let go. The road climbed up towards the cave hill. Jerry turned left and eventually parked outside a semi-detached house with a bay window. Music and laughter were coming from inside. A woman answered the door. She had a tray of sandwiches in her hand that were curled at the edges. "What in God's name happened to you?" she said.
What
"Don't
in
ask."
God's name happened to you? I mean, and that's where you leave it. He's just wiping his sweat. And the reader gets the impact. So, do you, as a writer, writing about the troubled time, feel that that is how you need to spell out without going into details? I mean, can you talk about your craft as a writer?
Yeah, I think that maybe because I wrote short stories and this is my first novel, I think that maybe the short story taught me a lot about maybe just about precision, and you don't have any room at all to make a mistake with a short story. It has to be, you can't have a spare word, and so maybe there was that sort of training as well that sort of makes me get out before I get too carried away with something and just try to move on to the next thing, and hope that it's left some sort of image that'll be that'll resonate with people or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now the short story. So how do you, let's talk about the book and the craft. When you talk about writing a short story and a novel, you've written both now. Where do you find yourself more attached and more sort of challenging?
I think if you'd asked me maybe 2 years ago if a novel was more challenging, I would have said yes, because I was in the middle of one and really very often not thinking that not knowing what I was doing. But I think they may be very different. With me, the short story maybe begins with something that's very elusive. It could be some sort of image. Like I saw a man with in a supermarket with a small child in a trolley, and then went for a walk in the woods near where I live a couple of days later, and I don't know how I thought these things were connected, but somehow they they ended up being a story. But it took very many thousand words and drafts and quite a few drafts to try to figure out what I was getting at. But I think that maybe because of I don't know, I think because I was terrified that if I approached a novel that way that I'd never ever be finished, that if I was just going to, inch along and really heavily work each paragraph and move on to the next one and just hope that it was going to work. The first draft of Trespasses was probably written in around 10 or 12 weeks. Now, it was a frightful mess, but I just forced myself to sit at the desk every day and not look back at what I'd written already, because I think that would have been very off-putting, and I just ploughed forward. And then I got to a stage where I thought, okay, maybe there's something here, and then just started again. And I did that maybe 7, 8 times, like right from the start to the end. And it just got tighter each time.
So, very interesting that you have the short story and the novel, and that's there. But where did this idea come from?
Well, I think the very first thing that I wrote is actually the epilogue, the kind of page and a half. I mean, that's pretty much unchanged. I visited the Ulster Museum where there was an exhibition called The Art of the Troubles, and this would have been, not quite 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement, and the first attempt, I suppose, to try and address the troubles, or to show all of this work. That people have been making things since the 70s, you know, but it was the first time anyone had attempted to bring it all together. And it was quite controversial in the way that these things are. Some people felt that it had gone too far, other people felt that it hadn't gone far enough, but it just made me think about how art can be used to say the unsayable, especially in a place where language is very fraught. And I don't just mean, you know, Irish language, you know, which is still a contentious thing, versus, you know, the English that's spoken there. But even things like, you know, not everyone even calls it the Good Friday Agreement. You know, a section of the population call it the Belfast Agreement. So everything is difficult. Even to call it Northern Ireland, a lot of people don't like that, and call it the North of Ireland. So all of those things are very hard. But it just seemed to me that that maybe visual art could avoid using, you know, without using actual language, that it was able to represent things. So I imagined a piece of sculpture, I suppose, that represented, I suppose, a ghost of the Troubles, and then I imagined a life for him. But then, when I really got into it, I think that, you know, Kushna was just seemed to be a much, I don't know, she was just seemed to be much more compelling to me. I could, you know, picture her so more clearly. So yeah, it's told from Kushna's point of view.
So the idea came from a visit to the museum,
Yeah.
where you had troubles as the topic, or as the thing. It's very interesting because this year LLF has, you know, there's a competition, creative writing competition, which is based on the painting of Ustad Allah Bakhsh, a representation of the 1857 War of Independence, as we call it, and mutiny, as the colonizer called it. It's interesting to see the language that emerges from a visual onto the page. To what extent were you able to grasp the silence that emerged from the canvas?
Yeah, that was. I think I probably did it by trying not to think about it too much. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was a little concerned maybe that was too conceptual or something at the start, because maybe tonally the epilogue and the prologue and then the epilogue are different maybe from the main body of the book. You know, most of the book, the story unfolds in a few months in 1975. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was just trying not to. I was just worried that I was going to wear off that very self-consciously or something. So I thought, okay, I've done that, and now I just need to get stuck into storytelling.
Well, I didn't realize we'd taken up so much time, but just bear with me for a minute. Their child, Devi, the novel as it journeys Kushla's life, you don't end it the way the reader expects it to end. You show the mother-daughter relationship, as I've said earlier. Now, Devi, a teacher's urge to help a child, gets misunderstood, and Devi's family gets into trouble. So, why did you think of that?
I think that I was probably very conscious that where we lived, the Catholics in the town that I lived in, there was almost like there was a class system that operated within the broader class system that we were part of. And for anyone who was unfortunate enough to be considered at the bottom of that system, really had to run the gauntlet of a Catholic church that was very unforgiving and also felt very under siege, and also felt that it had this sort of moral right to protect everything. And yeah, so I think that's maybe where that came from. Yeah, and I think that maybe also we've all had teachers who've been wonderful at some point in our lives. I certainly did. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I think that's maybe where it came from.
Okay, I have been told by the hall organizers that we just have 5 more minutes. However, for those interested in reading the book, there's so many layers. You make a reference to literary texts like The Dollhouse. You make reference to a movie, Ryan's Daughter. These drawings are very essential and add a lot of richness. Did you sort of deliberately, in order to be more precise, draw on them, or was it just a referential?
I think that I was really trying to pay attention to the world of the 70s, and also maybe some of those things are from memory, you know, of films that maybe my mother and my aunts might have talked about a lot. So I think I was just trying to bring that world to light. And then it turned out that some of them did have, I don't know, that they maybe did a little bit more than that with the text, you know, the film Barry Lyndon and things like that. And yeah, that anecdote about Stanley Kubrick being booted out of, given 24 hours to leave Ireland when he was filming Barry Lyndon, because apparently people were offended by the scenes of redcoats traipsing across, you know, the green fields. But apparently he left in 12 hours. So there were things like that that just seemed to work very well.
Well, I haven't done much justice to the book. I must admit there is so much to talk about and to bear evidence. This is what I've come with. You can see my bookmarks. I haven't covered half of it. I was afraid that how am I going to talk for 1 hour, but I never realized that 1 hour is going to be so short and sweet. I will, however, open the house to questions. Does anyone have a question? Anyone have a question? Yeah.
Diagwydd, Louise, Ismisha Sania. Sania Chuktai. Firstly, I'm just delighted that you're in boxing as well. My mother-in-law is a Kennedy as well. We can have a conversation offline. Yeah, she is from Kilvicudon.
Oh my God.
There's a lot of similarities between the boxing and the Irish culture as well, and beyond the culture, between the words as well. Firstly, does Kushla have a name?
Kushla?
Sorry, does Kushla have a meaning to the name?
Yes, so Kushla does. There's an endearment in Irish which is Kushla McCree, which means pulse of my heart.
Yeah.
And it's a name, it's not that common, but my mother had a cousin called Kushla Rafferty, and I thought it was a great name. So I
know, because my husband Brendan calls me Mokushla as well, so I was wondering.
Yeah, that's where it's from.
Mokushla.
It was the John McCormack song, Mokushla, yeah. Where
yeah.
It was used.
I think I'm more interested with your connection as an Irish person with boxing. Why boxing? Why come over here and launch the book? What's the connection?
To come here?
Yeah.
I was invited, and I was absolutely thrilled to be invited.
Is this your first time in boxing then?
It is, yes.
Wow. Well, you probably wasn't expecting someone to speak Irish to you over here.
No, I was like, what? I thought I was hearing things. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, go on, good.
I'd just like to, I'm sorry, we don't have time for questions. I've been just told by but I'd like to end on something that I firmly believe, that this book is intense, unflinchingly honest. And I have to admit, it did make me put the book down. For there were moments that were too close to the heart. Moments of pain, of grief, and also of celebration. I hope you enjoy reading the book as much as I did reading it.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Zareena.
you.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks.